Well, it's a happy day in the Uncle Doug and Jack household when a generous viewer sends us an amp to be used in one of our videos. Let's open this rather large box and see what we got. Well, we got Jack circling the box, sniffing away. It looks like what's in here is just expertly packed. Open this also. More stuff in here. Oh, I can't wait. Okay, let's start opening. We got all kinds of packing material here out of the way, and what I see makes me happy. It looks like a varnished tweed cabinet. Somebody has replaced the handle, but they sure picked a nice one. Okay, let's try and lift it out of here and see what it looks like. Well, it looks like Christmas came early, Jack. You got 2 packs of treats. We got 2 CDs that the viewer sent, I guess of his own music or guitar work. And look at this jewel. It's a very early Vega amp. Wow. I've never worked on a Vega. I don't know that I've ever even seen one in person. So this is really spectacular. Can't wait to get this out in the workshop, take it apart. I can see some kind of shady looking wiring in there. It'll give us something to fix. Very unusual speaker, probably an Alnico. So thanks so much, Dave. Dave is the same fellow who sent that microphone mixer a couple weeks ago with all the treats. So he knows how to take care of Jack and me with this fabulous amp. So let's get this out in the workshop and get started on it. What do you think, Jack? Oh, he likes this one. You know you've got a good item when Jack burrows into the packing material and won't come out. Jackie, look at that face peering at us from the packing material. Well, as promised, here we are out in the workshop with an absolutely spectacular suitcase style, late 30s, maybe very early 40s, Vega lap steel guitar amp. Vega began in Boston, Massachusetts way back in 1903, and they were famous for their very high quality lap steel guitars, acoustic guitars, and banjos. They were actually bought out by Martin back in 1970. But while they were in business, Vega made amplifiers like this, or had them made, for their lap steel and their later electric guitars. And most of those early amps were in the vertical rectangular kind of tombstone style with the speaker up at the top, but some of the early ones were like this with this elongated horizontal rectangular cabinet. That style of cabinet was more commonly seen in the National Dobro amplifiers from that period, but they were so long that there was actually room up in the attic here to stash the lap steel guitar. So you could tote it around. It must have been a pretty heavy load to tote, but you actually had your amplifier with a very elongated case and your lap steel guitar all in one box. It looks like the handle has been replaced. You can tell because they use screws here instead of rivets. They also used 2 different types of wood screw to hold this in, so this is really not the right way to do it. If you can't get the right rivets to replace this, then you should at least use good screws and bolts to be sure they can't pull out. Also, I'm not thrilled with the color of the handle. The quality is excellent, but I think I'm going to order a tan or brown handle for this. I think it will suit it better. Let's take a look at the cabinet. It's in a heavily varnished tweed. There's also supports back here, L-shaped supports, to keep the rear of the cabinet from separating from the side due to the weight of the amplifier chassis. Same on both sides. As you can see, the tweed is borderline perfect. All of the joints of the cabinet seem real tight. As we move to the front, you see these horizontal styling stripes, which I just dearly love, and the wrong types of screws. These are Phillips head screws holding in the speaker. They should be those type of kind of bronze-colored rosettes that just about every radio speaker in the universe back in the old days was held in with. All right, I removed the handle from the top of the cabinet, and as you can see, if you're going to pick screws to install a handle in a cabinet, these would not be at the top of my list, especially not with lock nuts onto wood screws. But to each his own. I think I'm going to get a brown handle and attach it properly. At first I was kind of put off by the color of the Grille cloth and screen. If you get up close, you see that we have a screen here that's superimposed over a piece of probably silk screened reddish cloth with the Vega emblem and vertical stripes. However, I believe this color made sense back when the amp was new, because I've seen pictures of one other version of this amp, and the area in here was very reddish colored. So I believe that the red that used to be here on the front would sort of lead into this red grille, and it would make more sense back then than it does now, where we have the kind of subtle colors here coming into this sort of a vivid, in-your-face lipstick red grille. However, I do believe this is completely original. The only other one I've seen a picture of, they had lost the cloth off the back, it looked like, and they had painted the design here, the Vega and all, right on the screen itself. I tend to believe, and you'll see when we get inside, we'll look at that cloth, it's the way this thing came. This may be the only completely original one you'll ever see. As we're getting to the back, we see that this cabinet has some pretty nice steel feet, and I just can't see replacing them, so I guess we'll just have to keep this off our wife's special end table. Then, like I commented in that last video that I did about that really original crackle finish amp, how nice it is to have all the screws in place. Well, I look under here, I see empty screw holes all over the place for God knows what reason. I guess we'll have to go inside to see. This one is just a missing screw. I think these are originals, and I'll try to match, but as is so typical, one is missing and there may be more missing. We'll have to do some investigating to see. And here's the rear of the cabinet with the traditional opening to allow heat to escape. And here's the Vega nameplate as a backing to the 3 input jacks. We see high fidelity amplifier, which is exciting. Boston, Massachusetts. And we see there's 3 inputs. Now Vega was famous for always having the letter V appear in its speaker grills and other places on the cabinet. And look what they've done with the inputs. A perfect V here. Very unusual to see them in this configuration. Normally they would be just horizontally aligned. We have a 1 and 2 input, and then microphone or instrument. No doubt these have different impedance. We'll check when we get inside. 110 volts, model 112, which doesn't mean what it would nowadays, where it would be one 12-inch speaker. This was simply a numerical identification for this particular amplifier, model 112, and down here is the serial number, which should probably give some clue as to the date of manufacturer. If there is a site anywhere on the internet that translates Vega serial numbers into dates, I sort of doubt it, but you never know. We'll have to check. Probably a volume control that's stiff but works. The early type of screw-in fuse and the old on-off toggle. Okay, looking inside, looks like an Alnico speaker, hopefully in good shape. Some wretched wiring and the top of a massive electrolytic capacitor. So let's pull the back door and see what it looks like inside. Okay, I removed the screws from the back door. Of course, one was missing, but the rest seem to be the original screws. This is over a nice piece of thin plywood. And as we look inside, the speaker says 540, and I have a feeling that's, May of 1940, which is probably not far off for the date of manufacture. Oh, good grief. I guess the tube vibrated out. They shipped it with the tubes in place. This seems like an odd tube. Good grief. What's this, a KT88 in this? Oh my God. Oh, I shudder. Can you imagine? Made in Russia, Mullard KT88. Oh, what could be further than from correct in this? Can you imagine the current draw? I hope to God this power transformer still has a 6.3 volt winding intact. Output transformer, we'll have to pull these other tubes. Good grief, this is incredible. Okay, the first tube out is a nice RCA 5Y3. Let's look at the second tube. Supposed to be a 6C5, which sounds kind of familiar from that amp that I just got through working on with a Crackle paint. And sure enough, an RCA 6C5. Notice how this is a much more modern version of it. And last but not least, the 6N7. This is sort of similar to the Crackle Finish Paint amp I just posted the video about. 6N7. 6C5 and a 5Y3, and instead of a 6V6 back here, it says that should be a 6L6. I don't think a KT88 is what Vega had in mind for this, but I've sure got a bunch of really nice 6L6s which are going to fit in here just fine. Okay, let's pull out the chassis and see what it looks like underneath. And also we'll check out this Empire State Building here of electrolytic capacitors. What a moose, huh? Alright, looks like a hot water heater. Okay, let's get this chassis out. Notice this red cloth in here. I wonder, maybe that's to tint the original Grille cloth to look red? I don't know. We'll find out. Also notice this is not the electrodynamic speaker that you normally see in these older amps. May not even be the speaker that belongs in this, but it is a really nice old 10-inch Alnico, and since there's only 2 wires instead of 4 for an electrodynamic, I'll just unsolder them and we'll pull out the chassis first and then the speaker. One little trick whenever you're unsoldering speaker leads, protect your cone with some paper or tin foil or something, because that hot solder, if it hits the cone, will burn right through it. And that's the end of a real nice cone. Okay, so now I'm ready to unsolder these leads. Alright, I've got the wires removed from the lugs, and this brings up a point that I get all kinds of viewer inquiries about. And that is, what's the polarity on a single speaker? The answer is, there is none. It does not matter which wire goes to which lug on a single speaker. The only time polarity matters on speakers is if you have 2 or more. And in that case, what you could designate as the hot wire, the plus wire, has to go to all of the same terminals on the 4 speakers. Say if you attach it to this one on the right, it has to go to that same terminal on all the other speakers. The negative wire, if you want to call it that, will go down here to the left-hand lug and will have to go to the same lug on all the other speakers. That way all the speakers move in coordination. They all move in and out at the same time, and you get good bass response and good tone. If your speakers are out of phase, they sort of neutralize each other and it really doesn't sound good. So single speakers, it does not matter how you wire them up. Well, the 3 screws that were holding in the chassis have been removed. You notice that this screw is much longer than the other 2, which means it's probably been replaced. But these with the black paint I think are probably original, so I'll need to find 2 more of these when I put the chassis back in. Now I'm just about ready to pull out the speaker, and I'm looking at the wood screws that were put in to hold that handle, and even some nuts put onto wood screws. That's exciting. What you're seeing on this amp is pretty much everything I talked about on that crackle paint amp, about how pristine it was and how nobody had done things like this to it. So you can see on a really beautiful old amp like this, which has been worked on by very non-discriminating people, you can see there's a whole lot of work to put them back into the condition that they deserve. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull this out. Try not to snag it on those wood screws. And the speaker looks perfect. Absolutely perfect. Some nice spider webs and all, but I think this is about as good a speaker as you could ever ask for. Very nice. We take the bitter with the sweet. This is sweet. And what makes it even sweeter is this is exactly the same speaker that I found in the one other photograph of a Vega 112 amp. So there is no doubt in my mind that this is the original Alnico speaker for this amplifier. Okay, the amplifier cabinet is completely stripped other than those unsightly screws. It's rock solid. All the joints are nice and tight. It doesn't weigh more than maybe 2 pounds. Super light because it's thin plywood. Now let's take an up-close look at the grille screen and cloth. This is the rear, and as you can see, the grille cloth is extremely thin and fragile and is glued to the rear of a piece of fairly heavy screen that was painted red at the rear and at the front, and very well painted. And wherever the red screen overlays the black silk screening of the cloth, the screen is painted black to match the black beneath it. All of this convinces me that this is exactly the way this grille screen and cloth left the factory. A little faded, but this is exactly how it was done. Well, the chassis is pretty much like the rest of the amp. It's been worked on, and not always with the utmost skill. It appears that the power transformer has been replaced. They had to enlarge the hole in the chassis, which it looks like they did with a pair of pliers, to put in a replacement transformer. And then instead of soldering or doing a good job of connecting the transformer leads, they, I guess, just wrapped them around the wires and then loosely taped them. Not exactly the highest grade of work. The replacement, this is the on-off toggle's been replaced, and power cord, obviously. That giant filter cap has been disconnected, and apparently other filter caps have been put in to take its place. We have another transformer underneath, so I'm thinking one is the output transformer and the other may be a filter choke. We're going to have to go through this thing, clip some of this junk out of the way, get a look at the circuit, and figure out how to make it work right and look right. Okay, so it looks like we've got our work cut out for us here. Let's sum up what we found. The cabinet is magnificent. The speaker is fabulous. And the chassis has been pretty well butchered. This reminds me actually of that little kitty that showed up at the front porch the other day crying and begging for the right kind of attention and help. This amp showed up at the same front gate yesterday and is begging for the same type of help, and it's come to the right place, just like the kitty. So pull up an easy chair, grab a beer, and let's fix the Vega amp. Well, this is an interesting discovery. This is the plate of the 6L6 or KT88 with a 0.05 microfarad cap that's obviously broken. The lead is separated from the cap. Then a 10K resistor in series to ground. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that. from a plate to ground. I don't know what purpose that would serve. Trying to get all this old firewood out of here. You know, if you're going to wrap a connection with tape, and not use a heat shrink, but just use tape, it might be good to wrap it around the joint instead of just sort of laying it on top. Whoever put in the 3-wire power cord actually did use heat shrink. So this has been worked on over the years by different people, and some of the work was pretty good, and some of the work was just atrocious. Okay, which I guess is to be expected on an amp like this. It's probably at least 70 years old, maybe older. Well, the dead wood's all cleared out. 9 electrolytic capacitors, probably none of which were any good. And now look at the nice open space we have here. We can trace the circuit, figure out what's what, and start to put this thing back together. Just to be sure, before I removed anything, I did make a very confusing, messy diagram to help me know what got clipped from each of the tube pins. Okay, I've been working away here for about an hour, and since there is no schematic, and this is a heavily modified circuit, I'm having to rely on the most valuable tool in your toolbox, and that is common sense. Okay, I looked here, and this giant solar cap is a 30 microfarad, so I assume that's the first reservoir cap, so I put in a 33 in its place. And then for the other 2 filter caps, I put in 22s. So we get a 30, 22, 22. I think that's going to work just fine. Then I went through and replaced all of the cathode bypass caps for all 3 tubes. I believe originally they may have been 10s, but I put in 25s at 50 volts. I think that'll work fine. Also, I checked the values of the bias resistors in each case to see if their value matched their indications, their color coding, and they were all close enough. Now the coupling caps have been replaced from the 6 and 7 over here to the 6C5, and then to the 6L6. I've rewired the primary of the power transformer now, and the power cord passes through a grommet. It's super glued to the grommet, no knot on the inside, it can't move back and forth. This is the output transformer, and the 2 speaker wires that were all hideous looking, and you can see them when you look through that little vent window. I just couldn't stand that, so I put in new cloth covered wires, and they're going to pass through and go up to the speaker. It's amazing how empty it looks after you get rid of all that dead wood. Okay, I also removed anything that didn't make sense to me, and this is what we got left. And I honestly think it may work now. We'll see. That's a long shot, but I'm going to flip it over, put in some tubes, including a 6L6, and let's see what happens. And since the transformer inside the chassis is the output transformer, then this is a stand core filter choke. And these are the new cloth wound speaker wires. Let's plug in some tubes. Okay, the amp is plugged into the current limiter. I've connected the speaker, and I have plugged in a 1/4 inch input jack right here so that I can ground it to see if the amp makes any noise. We'll flip it on here. Well, look at that. The tubes are illuminating. I'm starting to get optimistic. Okay, I cranked the volume up to half. I hear nothing from the speaker, which makes me a little nervous. Let's touch this, ground it. There it is. It works. I feel like Dr. Frankenstein. It's alive. And I guess all those parts really weren't necessary after all. I guess now it's time to turn it off. We can check it with the guitar, see if the tone is good, and if not, we'll modify it. and also check the voltages on the tubes, and just make sure that it's in really good working order before we start to put things. Well, I thought we'd have an update here on the little feral kitty. We went to the vet this morning, and all the news was good. She's gaining weight and getting really healthy. Does not seem to be pregnant. She's negative for feline leukemia. She has a little upper respiratory infection. She sneezes every once in a while, so we have antibiotics that we're giving her, and in 2 weeks she'll go in for her final shots, and we'll talk about getting her spayed. I wanted to thank all the Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for helping us to buy her a nice heated A-frame house here for the front porch with her own little stair steps, because at first she was a little too weak to hop up here, and her lounging front porch. There's a pad inside on the floor that heats up to exactly cat body temperature to keep her nice and warm and help her recuperate. As you can see, she's recuperating. She's really looking cute and still eating quite a bit and gaining weight. But as you can see, she's putting some of that weight back on. Her fur is getting a whole lot nicer. And we're just absolutely thrilled with all the news and with her very speedy recovery. Thanks to all of you for your interest and your assistance in making this happen. Okay, she just lives here on the front porch now and is just happy as can be. If I take her anywhere else, she runs right back to her porch. So I think we'll leave her here to take a nap and get back to work on that Vega amp. I'm in the process of making some screws to hold the speaker in place, because these really aren't appropriate. They just stick out like a sore thumb. Okay, so I took some brass screws that were slotted head, and I ground off the slotted head down to the unslotted part of the base of the head, and then chucked them up here in the drill press and spun them on a piece of hard rubber with sandpaper on top, and look at the really nice engine turn finish that you can get. Now again, this is still too bright for use on the amp, so what I'll do then is antique these heads so that they look old and tarnished to fit in with the rest of the amp. Now, after a little bath in gun blue to darken and age the heads, we have now a nice set of 4 speaker screws. Now granted, they aren't rosettes, but I think they look a whole lot less conspicuous than the Phillips head screw that was in place. Okay, I'm reinstalling the speaker in a little bit different rotation. I'm going to have the speaker wires come here through this strain relief and then swoop down to be soldered. I think that'll look a lot better than having this not be used. I've used some new washers with the original old nuts, and one of my little tricks is I cut a little short segment of rubber hose and push it down the shaft of the screw against the nut, and I guarantee you this will never come loose. It's even better than using lock washers. And there you have it. Ready for the chassis and the wires to be connected. We're taking a look here at the bottom of the cabinet. Remember, there were 4 extra holes drilled, and if you look inside you can see there's pencil lines drawn to direct where those holes should be drilled, and much to my horror, I think sometime or other maybe another chassis was installed in this cabinet, or maybe even, and I shudder to even say this, a solid state device that then would play through this speaker. We have no way of knowing. I don't want to know, okay? But I'm just fill them in, and I will sort of tint this area so they're as unobtrusive as possible, and I'm going to try to just put this out of my mind and memory. And here are my tarnished brass speaker screws. I think they will actually fit into where you might almost think that they're correct, okay, which I think is a whole lot better than those shiny Phillips head screws. I hope you agree. As far as the handle goes, I've ordered a nice brown replacement handle. I'm going to leave these brackets a little grungy. And remember, the back door was missing a screw? Well, guess what? They used one of the back door screws to hold on one of these brackets. So here it is. Now the back door has all its full complement of screws. Well, I decided to replace that brand new black handle with a old, used, sort of a tannish brown handle that I think really goes with the amp. It's been reinstalled with proper length nuts and bolts so that it can't pull through, and I think it looks a whole lot better. I'd like to get some rivets so that I can reattach these clamps in a more original looking way, but until I do, I'm afraid that screws and bolts are going to have to work. Well, I'm glad I checked the tube voltages. The bias resistor in place for the 6L6 was way too low and allowed about 100 milliamps of current to flow. Maybe it was biased for that KT88, but I ended up going with a much higher value here, around a 1000 ohm bias resistor, and now I've got plate dissipation of right around 12 watts, which is fairly conservative, but I am using a NOS Kenrad metal-bodied 6L6, which has rather conservative performance characteristics. I was checking the impedance of the three inputs and found that it really made no sense either. This blade here ran straight to ground with the signal. There were no grid stopper resistors at all. These signals ran straight in to the grids of the 6 and 7, which is never a good idea. So I just stripped all the wiring and components and rewired it with 68K grid stoppers for the bottom, 100K grid stopper for the top. I want to see if it makes any difference, and 1 meg to ground for all three. Okay, all the voltages checked out for the tubes in the circuit, and now I'm kind of tuning it up as far as tone goes, because there is no tone control on this amp. So I'm going to try to build into it the best possible tone, and then you can fine-tune it with the tone controls on the guitar. Now I'm going to show you a little secret here. Some people think that this tuning amps is some voodoo mystery or something. I'm going to show you just how simple it can be. Okay, in this case, I want you to listen to the amp just the way it is, and we'll discuss it, and then we're going to see a very easy way to fix it. Okay, we're at about a little over half volume right now. Let me just play a few chords, and then we'll see what we think of this sound. Okay, first off, volume's not all that wonderful, but it has no sparkle, almost no treble. It's kind of flat and lifeless. I sound like I'm describing wine or something here with all these adjectives, but I think you know what I'm talking about here. I mean, that's not bad, but that's not real good either. Now I'm going to show you a real simple fix. Okay, here is the volume control. 500K, which is fairly typical, or 1 meg. The signal comes in, and then it has a choice of going out or going to ground, depending on where the volume control is set. Now what we're going to do is give the high frequencies a little shortcut right across here through a 0.001 microfarad cap. Here's what happens. The high frequencies will get suppressed in this high value resistance. But if we give them this shortcut, they're going to come through nice and clear and sparkly, and then our volume control will be more to regulate our mid-range and low frequencies. I'm going to use a jumper down here to connect in the capacitor, and then we'll do a side-by-side check so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay, once more. Now this will be without the capacitor. Now this will be with a capacitor in circuit. a difference, huh? Now that may be a little too bright for some, but it can be easily toned down with the tone control on the guitar. But don't you see, it's kind of a sparkling, lively sound instead of an old flat, dead sound. Lots more treble comes through that short. Also, more volume. Those high frequencies really have an impact on the ear. This is with the capacitor and circuit. I think it's just a tremendous improvement. Also, you can experiment with different capacitance values. This is a 0.001, maybe a 0.0005 or a 0.002 might suit you better. So don't be afraid to use some jumper clips like this and do some experimenting. Also, some viewers suggested that I try this eutectic solder. It's 63% tin, 37% lead, and I use that to solder in the little 0.001 tone cap, and it just flows beautifully, makes a nice shiny rock solid solder, and I'll be honest with you, I like it probably better than the 6040. So thank you, viewers, you steered me in the right direction. Well, I guess it's time to say goodbye to this rather uncluttered circuit. It's time to flip it over and install it back in the cabinet, solder up the speaker wires, and hand it over to Ollie and Jack to see how it sounds with some tunes played through it. Okay, we have the new cloth speaker wires arching up over the power transformer through a piece of rubber insulating material and then soldered down here to the speaker lugs. Now while I'm in here, I'm going to show you a really, I think, tricky way to tell if your output transformer and speaker are functional without even plugging in the amp. Watch and listen to this. As you probably know, when you pull the trigger on your soldering iron, you're creating a good-sized spherical electrical field all the way around the soldering gun. Now the amp is unplugged, it's turned off, the volume's all the way down, and I'm going to place the soldering gun as close as I can to where the output transformer is in this amp circuit. Remember, it was under the chassis and it was right down in this area. So let's do this. I'll pull the trigger and let's listen to the speaker. You hear the hum? It responds to the solder gun trigger. If the output transformer and speaker were not functional, you wouldn't hear a thing. How's that for a simple way to test it? Well, the back door now is secure with a matching set of original oval head screws. The one missing screw found up here holding that handle on the roof of the cabinet. Also, the chassis is held in with a matching set of 4 1/4-inch drive sheet metal screws. So it looks like we're all back together and are ready to be tested. Well, now it's time to turn the mighty Vega amp over to Jack and Ollie. I've been practicing up some nice tunes for you. Let's see what you think. Well, I guess that's about it for this video on the rare and wonderful 1940 Vega amp. The starving little kitty, whose new name is Casey, wants to thank you for all your donations to help her get back to health. And I want to thank all you subscribers and Patreon patrons and PayPal contributors for your continued support of our advertising-free channel. If you would like to become a supporter of this channel, please check the video description for links that will enable you to do so. I also wanted to offer my heartfelt thanks to Dave Thompson, who so generously donated the Vega amp to this channel so that I could make this video for you all. I know I'm speaking for all viewers when I say thanks so much, Dave. So no matter what, I hope you all stay happy and healthy like this furry little kitty, and that you will join us on our next video. Thanks so much. Bye for now.